Hello everyone, Walter Bowne here. Today we're going to be talking about the backdrop of The Great Gatsby, and it's really what happens before The Great Gatsby opens. We can't talk about The Great Gatsby, or we could, but it'd be foolish to not talk about World War I. Both Nick and Jay Gatsby served in World War I. Fitzgerald was at Camp Sheridan, ready to enlist to do his thing for God and country. But the armistice came in November of 1918, ending the war with the Treaty of Versailles. America went into the war in April of 1917. Woodrow Wilson went before Congress. The war had been raging. 7 million civilian casualties in World War I, and about 10 million military casualties. Why? Why do we fight this war? Well, alliances, Archduke Ferdinand, long simmering hatreds and nationalism, and we can just go on and on and on about how ridiculous this was. But the consequence, of course, and the destruction and the elimination of so many people and so many men leads people in the 1920s to say, okay, there is no God, there is no country, there are no causes, and the only thing left to do is to have a good time and make money, have a good time. It might have a YOLO attitude. You know, you only live once, and there really is no God, because what kind of God would cause such things, to allow such things to happen? So we see the eyes of T.J. Eckelberg looming over the Valley of Ash. So when Fitzgerald in chapter 2 introduces us to the wasteland, his Valley of Ash, it echoes directly to T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. Before we look at The Wasteland, let's look at some famous World War I poets. All right, let's start with Wilfred Owen. He died at 25, 1918, 1 week before the armistice. So if you read All Quiet on the Western Front, the irony of having survived the war and dying on the quietest day is ironic and is tragic, that when we listen to Wilfred Owen here, he's going to die very, very soon, dying at 25. So when he talks about Anthem for Doomed Youth, he's the doomed youth, fighting a war that he probably didn't need to fight, right? But he's doing it for king, God, and country. What passing bells for these who die as cattle? Only the monstrous anger of the guns, only the stuttering rifles' rapid rattle can patter out their hasty orisons. No mockeries now for them, no prayers, nor bells, nor any voice of mourning save the choirs, the shrill, demented choirs of wailing shells, and bugles calling for them from sad shires. What candles may be held to speed them all, not in the hands of boys, but in the eyes shall shine the holy glimmers of goodbyes. The pallor of girls' brows shall be their pale, their flowers the tenderness of patient minds, and each slow dusk a drawing down of blinds. All right, let's take a look now at another Wilfred Owen poem. And this is all leading to, of course, The Wasteland and all these great poems from World War I, which leads us to understand, of course, the context of The Great Gatsby. Arms and the boy. Let the boy try along this bayonet blade how cold steel is, and keen with hunger of blood, blue with all malice like a madman's flash, and thinly drawn with famishing for flesh. Lend him to stroke these blind, blunt bullet leads, which long to nuzzle in the hearts of lads, or give him partridges of fine zinc teeth, sharp with the sharpness of grief and death. For his teeth shall seem laughing round an apple, there lurk no claws behind his fingers supple, and God will grow no talons at his heels, nor antlers through the thickness of his curls. Okay, here's another poem called Attack by Siegfried Sassoon. At dawn, the ridge emerges massed and dun in the wild purple of the glow-ringed sun, smoldering through spouts of drifting smoke that shroud the menacing scarred slope, and one by one, tanks creep and topple forward to the wire. The barrage roars and lifts, then clumsily bowed with bombs and guns and shovels and battle gear, men jostle and climb too, meet the bristling fire, lines of gray muttering faces masked with fear. They leave their trenches, going over the top, while time ticks blank and busy on their wrists, and hope with furtive eyes and grappling fists flounders in mud. Oh Jesus, make it stop. Oh Jesus, make it stop. Did it stop? Eventually, after 16 million people were dead. We could take a lot of time analyzing these poems, but as I heard one poet say, a poem was not written ever to be analyzed, which is ironic considering my profession. But I think there's a lot to that. You know, Emily Dickinson once said, "I know a poem is a good poem if it takes my head off, if it makes just like my head explode." Some of those poems give me chills, and just the idea of these. But to pay attention to meter, pay attention to alliteration, metaphor, all those things make such good poetry, and it just reaches into your soul. The next one we'll listen to is, of course, T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland.
April is the greatest month, breeding lilacs out of the dead land, mixing memory and desire, stirring dull roots with spring rain. Winter kept us warm, covering earth in forgetful snow, feeding a little life with dried tubers. Summer surprised us, coming over the Starnbergersee with a shower of rain. We stopped in the colonnade and went on in sunlight into the Hofgarten and drank coffee and talked for an hour. Bin gar keine Russin, Stamm aus Litauen, echt Deutsch. And when we were children, staying at the Archduke's, my cousin's, he took me out on a sled and I was frightened. He said, Marie, Marie, hold on tight. And down we went. In the mountains, there you'll feel free. I read much of the night and go south in the winter.
T.S. Eliot, an American who emigrated to England and became a British citizen. So some Americans keep him as an American writer, and the British like to think of him as a British writer. And he was a modernist writer. He was rejected many times in publishing because he was so out there. But The Wasteland was very popular, and Fitzgerald, heavily influenced by this poem, would go and construct something that he would call the Valley of Ash in chapter 2, and it comes back throughout the novel, a recurring motif with the eyes of T.J. Eckelberg, a disembodied face, an oculist with this glasses looming over a valley of ash, much like the killing fields of Flanders or Verdun in the Guns of August. And we see here the ash, all right? We see here the death, the desolation, the destruction of civilization. When T.S. Eliot writes, April is the cruelest month, bleeding lilacs out of the dead land, mixing memory and desire, stirring dull roots with spring rain. Here we have what Fitzgerald does a lot, mixing two things together. The idea of oxymorons, like he eats with ferocious delicacy. Okay, so ferocious, delicate, how can that be? April is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of dead land, mixing memory and desire, stirring dull roots with spring rain. All right, so it's cruel, yet life is growing, right? Breeding lilacs out of dead land, mixing memory and desire, stirring dull roots with rain. So what's the takeaway from all of this? I think the takeaway is to realize that in the 1920s, we can criticize the decadence, the immorality, the drinking, the infidelity, it's all abysmal, right? However, taken in context with World War One, and okay, we suffered, yet now let's live, let's have fun, let's throw caution to the wind, and there might not even be a heaven. So if there isn't, then why are we doing these things? And the idea of morality, and things changed. The mores changed. Women started smoking. They started drinking. They had their hair bobbed like a cadet, like Jordan Baker. Their short skirts and things like that. So you go one extreme, and then you go to the other extreme. You have this extreme period of death and destruction, and then it's like, okay, the exact opposite. The glitz, the glamour of Times Square, Broadway, and the party and the music and the jazz, and it's all just electrified. And if we can see this kind of the moral collapse of World War One and the moral collapse in the 1920s, it's like, what is right and what is wrong anymore? There's a lot we can talk about under this backdrop, and how Fitzgerald made his characters, Nick and Gatsby, war heroes. Well, Jay Gatsby anyway, when he didn't. So even though it was awful, there was still this idea that if you didn't go and do your duty and go play soldier, and then you're missing out on something. And I feel Fitzgerald did feel he missed out on his ability to prove himself. He didn't prove himself in football. He was too small, too weak, right? He was always trying to prove himself to people, and I don't think he ever, even though he's so great, he never really recognized, his greatness. I think he did, but we can talk about that, right? So just some speculation, and we'll talk more about this in class. All right, take care. Bye-bye.